not diminishing the loss. We've recognized it, we've honored it, we've gone through it, knowing that we have to pick ourselves up and realize that life is going to continue.
Welcome to Beyond the Loss, a podcast from the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center. Here, we talk about what life looks like after loss, the quiet moments, the unexpected feelings, the way people find community, and what life looks like in the days, months, and years to come. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to honor the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who have walked this land today, and those who have gone before us. I'm your host, Candace Stevenson. Our guest today is Michael Pierson, president of Pierson's Funeral Service and key founder of the Silent Hopes Memorial. He's here today to talk about the rituals that bring comfort, community, and his unique insight into loss and grief. Welcome today, Michael.
Thank you, Candace. It's great to be here.
For those who may be new to your work, how would you describe your role and your family's connection to this community?
We run a funeral home. So death and loss is just part of that. And of course, there's lots of different types of loss. And when you think of funerals, we think of grandma and grandpa. When it's time to go, they pass away. But there's other more difficult losses as well. And so growing up, my dad was a funeral director. And so when you're in grade 1 and they go around the class and ask what your parents do for work, and they'd get to mine, and my dad was a funeral director. There was kind of that ick factor about that, oh, your dad does what? And even the teachers would kind of stop, and there was something that was a little bit unusual about the fact that was a profession. So I kind of grew up with that, and yet it was so common in our family. But it was a dream of my dad to have his own funeral business. And that opportunity came in 1983. So that was the time when Pierson's kind of opened their doors and started the business, and we've been growing it since then.
What originally brought your family into supporting parents who are experiencing pregnancy and infant loss?
Right from the beginning, we wanted to operate a funeral business that was very compassionate, and we wanted to do it our own way. And that included also taking care of parents who'd had a pregnancy loss of any kind, or whether it was a young child or whatever the case might be. And I can remember one of the very first deaths that our family took care of was family friends of ours who lost a young child. And so it was very, very tragic. So right off the bat, we had special rates for children and infants, and we would make a special effort to look after them. And of course, you're going to look after every family that comes through the door with a loss. But there seems something that's a little bit tougher when it's the loss of a child. You know, naturally, that's not how the universe is supposed to work. You're always supposed to bury your parents, not your children. And so when there is a loss of a child, we've always known that might be more difficult, and it is more difficult. And so we just made sure that was something important. And we had our own ways of looking after families who are experiencing those type of losses right off the bat.
What have you learned along the way that's maybe changed how you help families going through that?
I think there's a few things that have shifted significantly. And one of them is that pregnancy terminations were not very common in those first days. And so oftentimes if there was a compromised pregnancy, families would then experience the loss later. So it might be right at the time of birth, or the child might be born and then later die. And now I know that it's almost a regular thing that when we know that there's a fetus that is compromised, termination is oftentimes what happens early. And that's to save the child's from all kinds of difficulty, but also the parents and sometimes the health of the mother. So and it's just much more common. So we do see that that's something that's very, very different than when we first started. And as a result of that, we don't see as many spontaneous miscarriages and SIDS deaths and some things like that we used to see. But there is still loss even in a terminated pregnancy. And so that is one of the challenges and things that, and it oftentimes goes unspoken. Mm-hmm. And those decisions are heart-wrenching for the parents, very often heart-wrenching for the parents.
So, Michael, you've been involved with the Silent Hopes Memorial. Can you tell us a bit about that and how you got involved with it?
In those early days of our operation as a funeral business, we ended up having very strong relationships with some of the social workers at some of the hospitals. And in doing that, oftentimes they would recommend us as a funeral home to families who experienced infant loss. And part of it was because we were not charging any funds to look after them. And the rest of it was just the fact that they really liked our approach. So, I don't know if it was always financial, but certainly I think they appreciated our approach to working with these families. What came to our knowledge, and it was not anything that I was aware, is in the hospitals, and there's some legal stuff here that I need to talk about for a moment. Mm-hmm. In Alberta, anytime there's a pregnancy, if the loss is before 20 weeks gestation, it is not considered viable and there's nothing legal to do with it. And so you can have a miscarriage or something up to 20 weeks and there's really no legal thing that has to happen. But once that pregnancy has hit the time period of 20 weeks and beyond, any pregnancy loss is a legal entity, and so it must be registered with the province with vital statistics. And then if you're going to cremate or bury the body, there's certain things that have to happen legally. And what was happening back in those days is there would be early pregnancy losses and there would be nothing required to do with it. So whether it was a terminated pregnancy or a miscarriage, oftentimes those little fetuses would be at the hospital and they would incinerate them with the hospital garbage.
Oh, wow.
And the women who were in the health clinic did not like that. Many of these little fetuses, the families didn't really feel a need to have a burial or to do something special, but they also didn't necessarily know what was happening with the fetuses. And so it was a wonderful lady by the name of Lucy Pascal and her team who wanted to see a change. And so they were wondering if Pierson's would, maybe if they collected these fetuses, is if we would cremate them for them. And so Lucy approached us and we were open to that idea. We both thought that we could have a more respectful way of taking care of those little infants. And so we put together this, what became known as the Silent Hopes Memorial Program. And in those early days, the part of it that really was part of the health system, and it first started at the Peter Lougheed Center, and then it kind of spread to the other hospitals in the area, is that they would then work with the individual families, let them know what their options were, and any families who didn't necessarily want to have like a private cremation or anything like that, they would collect these fetuses, and then we would make periodic trips to the hospital and bring them into our care. And then we would collectively cremate these little infants and have a periodic memorial services. And we've been doing them twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall, and where we would take all of the cremated remains and bury them in a special garden in the Rocky View Garden of Peace Cemetery, and then have a little memorial service for those families that experienced the loss. And many of those families, perhaps they didn't feel that they needed any type of ceremony. But when it's an early pregnancy loss at 20 weeks or less, oftentimes others don't know that this has even happened. And so their grief is not acknowledged. And so an important component of putting this program together would be to have a gathering where we could have some ceremony, where we could collectively mourn the loss of these infants, and have some way where they could be together with others and walk through that grief process. So that would have started at some point in probably the early 90s, late 80s. I'm not exactly sure of the timeline there, and I don't have it documented anywhere. When we first experimented with it, and right away we knew that we had put together a program that, although it would never see a lot of publicity or that it would be something that would be welcome to lots and lots of people, we were filling a very important gap in the system where families who are experiencing these early pregnancy losses could have an opportunity to say goodbye where they otherwise would not.
Can you tell me a little bit more about why you think it's important for families to have a tangible place to grieve?
I think that any time something is acknowledged, it just helps to validate what you've been through. Until there's some acknowledgement of it, the reality of it isn't really there. So having some experience of it, some tangible way of doing something, that kind of is what needs to happen to help us process some of our grief. And sometimes it doesn't need to be much, but sometimes there needs to be something to acknowledge the fact that a loss has occurred.
You mentioned that the Silent Hopes Memorial started around the late 80s, early 90s, and we've had a few decades since then. Has it evolved in some way as maybe communities' needs have shifted, or I'm sure it looks a little different today than it did on the first year you guys held it?
Yes, lots of things have changed, and over the years. And I think one of the things that changed in the early years was we didn't really have a good place to put the cremated remains. And so in working with the Rocky View Garden of Peace Cemetery, in those first years, we found a spot where we could put the cremated remains. And then with the help of one of the memorial companies here in town, we had a little headstone, granite teddy bear that was donated that kind of marked the spot. And after that, it was decided that if families wanted to, they could have a name added to a little plaque. So now, and what's been going on for a number of years, is those families who choose to participate in the Silent Hopes program can have their little infant have a name attached to one of the plaques. And the garden has grown quite a bit, so that there's now, 3+ decades of plaques that acknowledge these infants who've been lost. A lot of families have not wanted to have anything that would be visible for others to see, but they know that that space is there and their little one is there. And so regardless of what level of involvement it is, there is a place. They know a place they can go there if they want to. And even if they don't want to go there, they feel like their little one, their little loved one, their little infant, their little peanut, whatever they called him or her, is got a proper, respectful place, and that they've been taken care of well.
Thank you for that.
That's one part of it.
Oh.
Now, the other part of it is the service has changed.
Interesting.
And so just having the cremated remains in the cemetery, that's one part of it. But the service was always a memorial service, so the cremation of all of these little fetuses had already happened, and we've always had a little bronze teddy bear, almost to match the teddy bear memorial or monument that's out there, and it was never big enough to put all of the cremated remains. So the day before the memorial service, we would put most of the cremated remains, we would bury them in the cemetery. But there would always be a portion of the cremated remains we'd put in this little teddy bear, and it would be at the front of the chapel, this little hall. We call it a chapel, but this little hall where we would have the service. And then at the end of the service, we would take that little teddy bear with those cremated remains, and there'd be a little ceremony around placing them in the garden. And so just having a ceremony of getting from place A to B and placing the cremated remains in the cemetery has become an important part of the ceremony. And then what we do in that time together, one of the things that's been interesting is in the last many decades in Calgary and in the last many decades period is Canadians, and I'll just focus on Calgarians, they've become a little less religious. And so whereas the program, it's always been interdenominational and kind of without necessarily a hard religious connection, there's definitely some elements of spirituality that are in there, but it's become much more broad than that. So the words of comfort, they might be pulled from different religious traditions, and some of the music that you hear might be a little bit different, but it's kind of been designed to be broad enough that anybody could feel comfort if they were there. And it might speak to their own personal religious background if they have one, and they would still be able to connect to that while they're in that memorial service, but it's going to be much more broad in nature for the service. One of the things, and I can remember this, and I'm not exactly sure what they're doing now, but one of the early pieces that I loved hearing there, and it was very sad, but it was also very poignant, was this the Brahms Lullaby, which is such a beautiful song, which is, means so much to parents when they're rocking their child to bed. And yet, for these parents who have to imagine that their little baby is slumbering, and this is kind of more of an eternal thing. And it's not a religious song, and yet it can speak to any parents who've ever heard that music and who can identify with rocking a baby to sleep.
Wow. So we talked a little bit about how the actual ceremony has changed, and I think you've hinted a little bit at ritual or, the things that just help people as they move forward. We know that rituals can bring comfort and connection during grief. What roles do rituals play for families as they're experiencing loss?
I appreciate that question, because that can speak much more broadly to grief in general versus specifically to infant grief. But when you think of rituals, and there's some really interesting rituals in all of these cultures that we have here in Calgary, in this interesting, diverse city that we have in. And I think of many of the rituals that we see are in either religious or cultural traditions. And so let's just pick a few, for example. Those who might be Christian and specifically Catholic. In the Catholic tradition and in that faith tradition, they have very often there's a very specific Mass that they have, which is just common every week as they attend church. But when a death has occurred, there's a funeral Mass. So once again, it's that ritual of doing this on a regular basis, of going there, of knowing what a lot of these things mean to them in their own beliefs, seeing that and being part of that. The priest saying very specific prayers, lighting the incense, having communion. All of those things are part of that ritual. And all of those elements of that ritual will bring comfort to those who are part of that tradition. There are other rituals, and I think of the large Buddhist community in Calgary. And of course, Buddhism is another religion, and much of the traditions or rituals that we see in their world, and they vary oftentimes different from country to country. What Buddhism looks like in Vietnam might look a little bit different in China, and it might look a little bit different in Cambodia or Laos, but oftentimes those rituals are very similar. So they'll have their own chanting and praying and offerings that they have that will be specific to them. And once again, it's going back to something that feels bigger than today, that extends over time, that goes back to the past, that leads us to the future. So these rituals kind of help us in our very own, today, in our loss and our grief right now at the moment. One of my biggest worries or concerns or maybe frets as somebody in my profession is that we're seeing less ritual in the world as people move away from religion, as perhaps sometimes there's cross-pollination in cultures, and so rather than embracing one or the other, they kind of reject them both. And so the families oftentimes don't have rituals. So when a loss occurs, they're not sure what to do. And so what do you do when a loss has occurred and you don't have anything to fall back on? And some families will create their own rituals, which is great, but sometimes it kind of leaves a little bit of a hole because they're not exactly sure how to, what's going to help and what's going to comfort them in their grief. So I find rituals are really valuable and really important. And broadly speaking, one of the great rituals of all time that crosses all cultures and crosses just everything is food. And you think about, the traditional Christian funeral that when the burial's all done, you go back to the hall and the ladies are going to serve you egg salad sandwiches. Well, there's nothing like a ritual of eating an egg salad sandwich in a church hall, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be, once again, going to the Buddhists, it could be that Vietnamese sub that's handed to you at the cemetery, or it could be going back to the hall and having all of your Italian friends have a big feast with pasta and whatever it is they're going to feed. There's oftentimes an important element of coming together over what we refer to as breaking bread together. So I think, and oftentimes having an element of that reception or food, or that's just part of what it is that we're going to do to bring ourselves together collectively as a group so that we can kind of mourn and grieve together, take a deep breath and move on in life and get on to not diminishing the loss. We've recognized it, we've honored it, we've gone through it, knowing that we have to pick ourselves up and realize that life is going to continue.
It sounds almost like you're speaking to a community of caring, almost the way we take care of each other with food as part of our grief process. And, that's kind of the most basic care we have from the very first day.
Oh, there's more love in a tuna casserole than we could ever measure.
I don't know that I've ever heard anyone say that before. What are you seeing in how pregnancy and infant loss is handled today? And are we seeing different progress, or is there still a long way to go? What is it that you're seeing in your experience?
There's a little bit of denial sometimes. Denial that the loss perhaps was important. perhaps denial that there was grief there at all, and so there's an element of that, but I still see humanity being humanity. I still see parents mourning the loss of their loved one. I still see parents, they're the grandparents, the parents of the parents who are experiencing the loss, helping. I still see friends helping. I still see ritual that they can put together and honor their loved ones. So some of those things have not changed. And that's what's somehow comforting, reassuring about society, is that as people grow up and they're at that age where they have kids and experience loss, that has not changed over the ages.
Are there any supports that you wish were standard for every family?
I do like the idea of having resources and a place for people to go, and I think it's really important. I think one of the things that I love about the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center is that they have they are kind of a central hub for these families who are experiencing loss, and you can go there and you don't have to worry about all these other types of grief that occur in the world that's more specific. And then even from there, they can kind of tease it out to where the most help will come from, whether it might be, and in some experiences, it might be a counselor that's needed. Sometimes it's just, some conversations or a little bit of a support network of mothers who are with each other, who've all experienced these losses or something else like that. That's a far cry from, loss support groups where somebody has died as a result of a specific type of trauma for people who are older, or something awful like that, or cancer support groups. Very different.
Interesting. A lot of people would probably say, I could never do what you do. The work you do seems just impossible and so difficult. What keeps you going in this work?
Oh my gosh, I love my work. I love going to work every day, and so it's an opportunity to help someone. And that's what I get out of it is to be able to meet someone face to face, or however it is, and kind of recognize and acknowledge their challenge, their loss, and help them through that. And oftentimes my help is very just logistical in nature. I've got to get the right forms ready. I've got to make sure we transport the infant from here to there. We've got to make sure that we get the cremation done. We've got to make sure that this happens by a certain time. We need to organize these people. So oftentimes it's just logistics that I'm dealing with. But at the same time, those logistics put together the ritual. They put the time together. So and those families really appreciate the support, because they're often at a loss of the things that need to have happen or how to bring it all together. So it's, when I go to work and I'm meeting with a family of any kind, with any kind of loss, I'm not necessarily experiencing the loss. It might be really traumatic for you, and I can acknowledge that for you. But for me, I've got some important tasks to do, to put together so that your experience is good. And I find so much gratitude. When I can do my job, I find that I get a lot of just natural gratitude. And who doesn't like gratitude?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can go to work and do something, and I can come away feeling good about it. That being said, I am human and I have my own losses.
What do you think is helpful for people to know before they're sitting in front of you?
I think the first thing they need to know is that we're here to help them. That's the most important thing. Part of the first stage of this is just getting to know them as individuals, as humans, and figuring out how to work with them and what they need, and then recognizing that really that's my job. I'm here to help you.
Thank you, Michael. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything that you feel would be good for our listeners to know?
Sure. One of the things that, and this is really personal, I think I'll share one short story. I wasn't sure if I would do this, but I think now that we're here, I will. I was young and single when we started the Silent Hopes Memorial program, and I was a late bloomer, so I didn't get married for a long time after we'd started it. And my wife and I, we got married and we had our first child, and it was wonderful. And our second child ended up in an early pregnancy loss. And it was very difficult for my wife and I, and we were a little more mature, when we had our second pregnancy, and it was different being on the other side of the fence, walking through it, and I had all of the understanding of everything that was going on. That was clear to me. I knew what was happening. I knew that there was the Silent Hopes Memorial Program. I knew that this pregnancy was under 20 weeks, and I knew all of these other things. I knew the logistics of it, but I had to walk through it. And I had to do that with my wife. And we sat in one of those services ourselves. And we have a little child in that garden with her name on the plaque. And it was really reassuring. I had done some legwork to help myself and to help my wife, and I could feel the good of it. So, I recognize that the losses are real. These losses are real. I didn't understand what it was like to lose a parent until a few years ago, when my own parents in their, after living for long, productive, wonderful lives. But it wasn't until they passed away that I really walked through those experiences. And I don't think everybody has to have an infant loss to understand what grief is. But it's nice to everyone's to understand that that's what those things are out there for, and they do good. Yeah, so I think there's the people that helped me, the people that have helped my family. I appreciate all of them, and the beauty is all of us can walk through these grief experiences and feel sadness, intense pain and sadness quite often, and come out on the other side and be okay. And I think that's really, really important. It's to come out of that with hope and recognize that we can continue with good, productive, happy lives, and things are okay.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I think that is so valuable for our listeners to hear. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And as you can tell, that definitely touched me. So as we wrap up today, thank you for being our guest, Michael, and for listening to Beyond the Loss today. To our listeners, if today's conversation touched you, or if you or someone you love is seeking support, the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Center offers free counseling, coaching, groups, and programs. These programs are made possible by donors and supporters. Visit pilsk.org for more information. Until next time, this is Beyond the Loss.